In this video, I am going to change the way that you think about podcast monetization. And that change is going to make it so that you can monetize your podcast more profitably and much more quickly. My name is Kevin Schmidlin. I have monetized 2 shows past 6 figures in revenue. My first show called Philly, who made about 6 figures, about $120,000 to $140,000 in revenue per year in 2018 and 2019. And my second show, Grow the Show, in 2021, made $502,000 in revenue. And so I've done this twice. Those are both not massive audiences. And so I know a thing or two about podcast monetization. And so what I'm about to share with you will hopefully make it so that you can also monetize your podcast much more profitably with a much smaller audience. Now, most podcasters that I run into think about monetization in this way. The thinking is that the way that you monetize a podcast is to start a show, grow the audience as big as you can, and then someday down the line, start selling sponsorships for your podcast, right? Paid ads, where you get other companies to buy advertisement space on your show. And the thinking is that that is how you make money doing podcasts, right? Well, that is totally not the only way to make money. And it's this mindset that is killing the vast majority of podcasts. Because most podcasters believe that you shouldn't make a dime, or you can't make a dime on your podcast for the first 1, 2, 3, or even 5 years, what's happening is podcasters aren't thinking outside of the box and aren't trying to make any money with their podcast and saying that'll happen someday. But the problem is you burn out on podcasting before that day ever arrives. And so this is why so many great shows die before they ever make a dime, and they just wind up being a huge, massive waste of time and money and energy and creativity. You then also have podcasters on the other side of the coin who are trying to monetize way too early. People who have released 5 episodes of their podcast and then are trying to get sponsors and are like, all right, I think it's time to monetize this thing. There's no such thing as time to monetize. But also, if you are going for sponsorship monetization, sponsorship only works with massive volume. You do need a specific audience size to be able to monetize your podcast effectively via paid ads. So this is a double-edged sword. You have people who are trying to monetize their show via advertisements way too early. They don't have the audience size, which is generally about 5,000 downloads per episode. You can do less for a more niche show, but the general rule of thumb is it's really only worth it to monetize with paid sponsorships if you have 5,000 downloads per episode. And so you have people who are trying it too early and are trying to just wasting their time trying to sell paid ads when they've got like 50 listeners. And then you've got other people who think that you can't make any progress on monetization at all until you get to 5,000 downloads per episode. But guess what? This show's going to take investment to get there. You're going to have to spend money to grow the show that big. It's just a fact. It's not going to be free. So what do we do? This is the thinking of the podcasting industry, that this is the only way to monetize your show. That's just how it's done. And this is why there are so many shows that have no listeners, make no money, and there's no middle class in podcasting. And so right now, I am here to change the way that you think about podcast monetization, because odds are you are probably stuck in the belief set that most podcasters have today, because that's what everybody, including a lot of podcast gurus, other podcast gurus, and consultants are saying. All these people generally haven't made that much money podcasting, or if they have a massive, massive, massive audience and you're not there yet. And so what do I do, right? Cool. And so what do, right? Here's what you do. You change the way that you think about podcast monetization. Despite what you may have heard, what I'm about to tell you is true. There is only one way to monetize a podcast audience. One way. And it is not sponsorship. It's not only sponsorship. Let me explain. If we talk about what a podcast audience is, it's other human beings who listen to your podcast every single week, right? Your podcast audience is not a downloads number. It is a set of people who listen to what you have to say and listen to your show week in and week out. Those people listen to you because you provide something to them. And usually it's something more than just entertainment. After a decent amount of time of you providing that thing to that listener, whether it's knowledge, how-to, comedy, laughs, entertainment, storytelling, whatever it is that your podcast provides, after a certain amount of time, that listener is going to trust you so much that they are going to want more from you. Or at least they are going to want more of the thing that your show gives to them. After they have listened to your show for at least 5, 7, maybe even 10 episodes, they trust you so much that they would be willing to buy something either that you sell or that you recommend. And that is how you monetize a podcast audience. It is by converting your listener into a customer of something. That something can either be of your product or service. So if you are a business owner and you offer them a product or service, they buy that thing from you, or they buy someone else's product or service that you recommend to them. So you don't have to be a business owner to be a successful podcaster, but you do have to get people to buy something in order to be a successful podcaster. And so it is for that reason that what I am telling you today is that there is only one way to monetize a podcast audience, and that is to convert that human being into a customer of either your business or someone else's business. That's it. It all boils up to that. Let's dive into those two categories for a minute. Now, the first option, converting your podcast listener into a customer of your product or service, is by far the most profitable. It is also, however, by far the most work, right? Because you have to create and fulfill a product or service. The product could be a digital product, like a digital course. It could be a physical product. It could be a digital service or a physical service, right? But basically, where the listener becomes a customer of your business is hands down the most profitable way to monetize a podcast. In 2021, the Grow the Show podcast got about between 40 and 45,000 downloads across the year. We published about between 25 and 30 episodes. I don't have the exact figures. I could look them up for you, but it's around in that ballpark. We published every other week, and the main monetization method of the Grow the Show podcast was to convert a small percentage of Grow the Show podcast listeners into customers of the Grow the Show podcast accelerator, which is a very, very intensive coaching program that I offer for podcasters that includes a massive online knowledge base with about 160 videos and tutorials, access to me for coaching twice a week. We place you with a podcast producer who handles all your editing, blah, blah, blah. I'm not here to sell you on the program, but what I'm here to say is the Grow the Show podcast accelerator generated $502,000 of revenue in 2021 off of 25 episodes of the Grow the Show podcast that only got about 40 to 45,000 downloads. Tons of math coming at you here. But if you do the math there, you can see that we made over $10 per download of the Grow the Show podcast in 2021. Compare that to massive shows like Serial. Serial has gotten 300 to 400 million downloads, and per year they make about the same, $500,000 in advertising. By those calculations, they're making less than a cent per download. Now, it was a lot of work to build out this podcast accelerator, hire the team, sell people into the program. Like, there is an entire company behind the Grow the Show podcast that creates and fulfills that product or service. So yes, it's a lot of work, but you can make $500,000 on 40,000 downloads. And so monetizing your podcast this way, by converting your podcast listeners into your customers, is the quickest way to be a seven-figure podcaster, full stop. It takes the most work, but it's also the fastest way. So you might be a business owner who doesn't have a podcast. The podcast is a great way to drive customers to that business. If you're a podcaster and you want to create a product or service, I recommend doing that because it's going to be the most profitable, and you're going to learn a ton about business, right? And you're going to essentially be the founder of a company. And the coolest part is you are monetizing your show by serving your listeners more. Right? So instead of just taking your listeners and sending them to someone else's business, you get to work with them even farther, which creates incredible raving fans and just is way more fulfilling. So that's the first option. Create a product or service and have your podcast listeners be monetized by becoming customers of that product or service. Those product or services could be courses, it could be live events or conferences, it could be a mastermind, some sort of done for you service, a physical product, or like merchandise that you sell, although I don't generally recommend merchandise. That should be more of a marketing play than a sales play because you don't make a lot of money off of clothes. There isn't high margins on that. You could sell coaching, you can sell consulting, group coaching, one-on-one coaching. You can write an app and sell apps or software. You can sell a monthly membership like a Patreon or Supercast. All of those are converting your listeners into customers of your business. That means that they love the free show and they decide that they want to give you money for more of something. That, again, is the most profitable way to monetize your podcast and the most profitable way to convert your podcast listeners into customers. The other half of the equation, if you are not interested in having a product or service, or if for whatever reason it's just not in the cards for you, then your other option is to monetize your podcast by converting your podcast listeners to customers of someone else's business. The two main ways to do this are through either affiliate marketing or CPA, cost per acquisition deals, where every time one of your listeners buys that product that you recommend, you get a cut. Or you can do the old-fashioned podcast monetization way with just regular CPM or cost per mil sponsorships. Cost per mil basically means that the sponsor pays you for every download that your podcast gets. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, that is the default thing that most people think of when they think monetizing a podcast. They jump straight to just selling sponsorships. But here's the thing. Buying ad space on your podcast is risky for another business because you're not guaranteeing that them giving you money to have access to your audience is going to translate into them getting new customers. And I'll tell you right now, if it doesn't do that, if somebody sponsors your show and they give you, say, $500 for a sponsorship, and then they don't get any new customers from that sponsorship, they just lost $500. They got nothing from that deal. And so this is where you have to get out of your head that sponsors are there to support you and to support the show. That is not why they sponsor a podcast. Sponsors sponsor a podcast to get new customers. This is why when you pitch sponsorships, you should not go to a potential sponsor and say, hey, will you support the show? Because they don't care about your podcast. They don't care if your podcast exists as much as they say they do. Their business is going to be just fine if your podcast disappears. Their business will not be fine if they don't get new customers, and that's what you can help them with. So the way that you do that is to take your adoring podcast audience and bring them to a product or service that they can buy, and you get paid for getting those people to buy that product or service. I know this sounds rudimentary explaining it this way, but there's a break in a lot of podcasters' brains thinking that a sponsorship is just a business giving you money so that you can do the podcast. That's not what it is. Nobody cares if you do what you love. Nobody cares. Only you care that you get to do what you love. And so you have to make the thing that you love doing beneficial to other people so that they give you money. Okay, so hopefully now you've seen that there's really only one way to monetize a podcast, and it is by converting a percentage of your listener base into customers of either your business, right, a product, service, or membership like Patreon, or someone else's business via affiliate ads where you get paid every time they buy the product, or via CPM sponsorships where the business just pays you to talk about their product or service regardless of whether or not they get any customers. And I will reiterate, if they don't get any customers, they are not going to become a sponsor again. They're going to leave because that is a terrible investment for them. Now, I know that this video is going to get a lot of flack, and there's going to be people who argue with me. There's a million ways to monetize a podcast, Kevin. Oh, you could charge your guests. Oh, you could do this. You could do that. Yeah, sure, whatever, fine. I don't care about that. My goal here is to help you think about how to make more money off of your podcast. I've been able to make $500,000 off of 40,000 downloads of my podcast in 2021 just by releasing like 25 episodes. And I could have released more, but again, like this is working great and you can do the same thing. And so anybody who tells you that you have to have 5,000 downloads per episode minimum to monetize is wrong. Anybody who tells you that you can monetize right away with no listenership via paid sponsorships is also wrong, right? So there's ways to do this. Now, the Grow the Show podcast is about to have sponsorships on it. So I am adding another stream of monetization onto my podcast, Grow the Show, because now with the audience size that I have, it makes sense to get sponsors. But I was able to build up to this point by offering a product or service. And that is how I've been able to make in 2021 more than $10 per single download of my podcast and more than $500,000 in revenue for my podcast business. You can do the same. Now, I know I just threw a bunch of numbers at you and probably just challenged a lot of your beliefs about podcasting. So if you want to talk this over or even fight me about it, join me in the Grow the Show Facebook group and I would be happy to debate. Or if you have questions about how you can convert your podcast listeners into monetized paying customers of either your business or someone else's business, hop in the Facebook group. The link is in the description below and tag me in a post and I'd be happy to weigh in and help you get there. And of course, like and subscribe if you want more podcast videos like this that change the way that you think about podcasts and that help you to grow and monetize your show faster. My name is Kevin Schmidlin. I'll see you in the next video.